The restaurant was busy that evening, the kind of busy that made every step feel heavy and every movement urgent. The waitress moved quickly between tables, her tray balanced perfectly on her hand as she served plates of steaming food and refilled drinks before anyone even noticed. She was young, with soft brown hair tied neatly back and eyes that always seemed to watch quietly, observing everything, but never making a fuss. Customers barely noticed her beyond her polite smile, and she didn't mind. She had learned a long time ago that sometimes it was better to stay in the background, to do her work and let the world keep spinning around her. That night, she had already been working for 8 hours, carrying plates, taking orders, and answering questions with a calm voice that never cracked under the pressure. The restaurant was alive with the usual sounds, the clatter of cutlery, the low hum of conversations, laughter here and there, and the occasional shout from the kitchen when something was ready. She knew all of it by heart, almost like a rhythm she could follow without thinking. She liked this rhythm because it kept her moving, kept her focused, and helped her forget about the quiet loneliness that often filled her small apartment. Once her shift was over, near the corner of the room sat a man who looked different from the usual crowd. He was well-dressed, clearly wealthy, and with a sharp suit and a confident way of sitting that seemed to say he was used to being the center of attention. Around him, a few friends laughed at his jokes, but he noticed things others didn't. His eyes kept wandering to the old piano tucked in the corner of the restaurant. It was not new, not shiny, but it had been there for as long as anyone could remember. Sitting quietly, mostly ignored, the waitress walked past that corner several times that evening, carrying plates and filling drinks, and each time she felt his gaze on her. She tried to ignore it, pretending she hadn't noticed, but it made her uneasy. There was something about the way he looked at her that was different. It wasn't the usual glance from a customer. It was sharp, testing, curious. Finally, he called her over with a wave of his hand. "Hey you," he said, his voice carrying across the table. She approached, keeping her hands steady even though her heart skipped a beat. "I hear you know how to play the piano." She blinked, momentarily taken aback. I used to play," she said softly, almost wishing she hadn't spoken. She hadn't played in years, not since life got in the way. She didn't feel ready to admit that to a stranger. He laughed, a loud, confident sound that drew the attention of nearby tables. "Used to play? Come on. Everyone says they used to play. I'm talking real talent. Let's make a bet. If you can really play, I'll make it worth your while. You walk away from this night with something you've never had before." The waitress froze for a moment. The restaurant seemed to quiet down, though only slightly. A few people at nearby tables glanced over, curious about the conversation. Some were amused, smirking at the idea of a waitress taking on a rich man's challenge. She could feel the eyes on her, all of them waiting for the answer. Her mind raced. She had learned the piano as a child, spending hours every day practicing. Her small apartment had once been filled with the sound of music, her fingers dancing over the keys as she lost herself in the melodies. But that had been a long time ago. Life had gotten in the way. Work, bills, responsibilities, everything had pushed music to the side. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Still, there was something in his challenge, a spark of curiosity she couldn't ignore. Part of her wanted to say no, to walk away and let him be wrong. But another part of her, the part that had never completely given up on her dreams, felt a thrill. Maybe this was her chance. Maybe this was the moment that could change everything, even if she didn't yet realize how much it could change. "I'll play," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, but strong enough for him to hear. The man's eyes lit up with excitement, and a wide smile spread across his face. "Now that's what I'm talking about. Come on, show us what you've got." The restaurant buzzed with whispers. Some people chuckled, thinking it would be funny to watch her fail. Others leaned in, curious to see if there really was any talent hidden behind her quiet demeanor. She took a deep breath and walked toward the piano, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The wooden floor felt colder under her shoes as she moved, and the chatter of the restaurant faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. She sat down on the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. The piano was old, the wood worn from years of use, and the keys were not as smooth as she remembered. She ran her fingers lightly over them, feeling the weight and texture. Recalling the countless hours she had spent learning each note, each chord, each movement, she closed her eyes for a moment, taking a steadying breath, and allowed herself to remember the music that had once filled her soul. The man leaned back in his chair, watching with a mixture of amusement and anticipation. He still expected her to fail, still expected this to be a small, entertaining moment that he could laugh about with his friends. The people around him waited, some skeptically, some with a growing sense of curiosity. But the waitress didn't see them. She didn't see the doubts or the laughter. She saw only the piano, and she felt only the music that had never truly left her. Buried deep beneath years of hard work and ordinary life, her fingers touched the keys, and the first note sounded. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried a memory. A memory of late nights, of silent practice, of the joy of creating something beautiful. The second note followed, and then the third, each one more confident than the last. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The music flowed naturally, almost as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. The rich man's laughter faded. His confident smile wavered as he realized she wasn't just playing a bit of piano. She was creating something real, something alive. He leaned forward slightly, watching her fingers move with skill and precision, moving across the keys in a way that spoke of dedication and talent. The whispers around the room grew softer, replaced by a sense of awe. People stopped talking, their curiosity turning into silent observation. The waitress continued to play, each note carrying more confidence than the last. She felt the rhythm of the restaurant fade completely. She was no longer a waitress carrying trays and taking orders. She was a musician, a storyteller, sharing pieces of herself through the music that had been inside her all along. Each chord held emotion, each melody told a story, and she could feel the energy of the room shift as people leaned in. Captivated, she remembered the little moments that had brought her here, quiet evenings practicing alone, the frustration of struggling with difficult pieces, the small victories when a song finally sounded right. All of that had led to this moment, and she allowed herself to feel proud, even if only for a fleeting second. The music flowed naturally now. With it came a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. Around her, the restaurant seemed to change. The clatter of dishes, the chatter of customers, the low hum of background music, all of it faded away until there was only the sound of the piano and the sound of her own heartbeat. People stopped eating and talking. They stood, leaned forward, or simply stared, mesmerized by the unexpected talent unfolding before them. Even the man who had made the bet seemed caught off guard, his usual confidence replaced by surprise and respect. Her hands moved faster now, no longer hesitant. She played melodies she had only ever played for herself, pieces she had once dreamed of performing in front of others, but had never had the courage to share. The restaurant had become her stage, the piano her voice, and the audience her witnesses. She realized that for the first time in a long time, she was fully seen not as a waitress, not as someone ordinary, but as a person with talent, with a story, and with the power to move others through her music. The rich man leaned back in his chair, silent for the first time that evening. His friends exchanged looks of disbelief, unable to speak. The other customers watched quietly, some with tears forming in their eyes, others simply in awe. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from casual dining to something almost sacred, a moment that none of them would forget. She continued to play until the final notes lingered in the air, soft and delicate, as if hesitant to leave the space they had filled. For a moment there was silence, not the awkward silence of waiting, but the kind of silence that comes when everyone is holding their breath, suspended in the emotion of what they have just experienced. Then, slowly, the room erupted. Applause, cheers, and claps filled the restaurant, a wave of sound that seemed to lift her from the piano bench. The rich man's mouth was open, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely impressed. He nodded, almost sheepishly, as if he could not deny what he had just witnessed. People came closer to congratulate her, to ask questions, to touch her arm lightly in awe. The waitress felt something she had not felt in a long time: validation. Not the validation of money or of praise, but the quiet, deep satisfaction of knowing she had shared something real, something meaningful, something that mattered. She smiled softly, still sitting at the piano, letting the applause wash over her. That night, the ordinary rhythm of her life had shifted. A simple, quiet evening in a restaurant had become a turning point, a moment she would remember forever. The bet had been made, yes, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was the music, the courage to play, and the realization that talent, passion, and perseverance could emerge even in the most unexpected places. The waitress finally stood, brushing her hands over her apron, her heart still racing. She looked at the rich man, who had been silent for a long moment, and saw the respect in his eyes. No words were needed. The music had said it all. That evening, the restaurant went back to its usual rhythm, the clatter of dishes and chatter of customers slowly returning. But for her, nothing would ever be the same. The piano had reminded her of who she really was, and she knew that the world around her had just caught a glimpse of something extraordinary, something hidden in plain sight. And so, the ordinary waitress, quiet and often overlooked, had taken the first step into a story that would change everything. All because she had accepted a bet that no one truly believed she could win. The night after her unexpected performance, the waitress could hardly sleep. She lay in her small apartment, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, her mind replaying every note she had played. The sound of the piano still lingered in her ears, each melody bringing a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. She had surprised herself more than anyone else. It was one thing to play in secret, one thing to remember the music from years ago, and another entirely to let it loose in front of a room full of strangers. To let them see what she had kept hidden for so long. She thought about the rich man and his friends, the casual way he had made a bet that had turned into something far bigger than either of them had expected. The applause, the stunned silence, the looks on people's face, said all kept coming back to her. For years, she had been careful not to attract attention. She had worked hard, yes, but in ways that went unnoticed, ways that allowed her to survive and keep moving forward without ever having to stand out. And now, in a single night, she had stood out. She had been seen. Even in the darkness of her small apartment, she could feel the shift. It was subtle, but undeniable. Something inside her had changed, and she knew that the world outside had changed too, even if only a little. She had stepped out of the shadows. And she wasn't sure yet if she was ready for the light, for the attention, for the possibility that life could be different. The next day at the restaurant, everything felt different. Customers who had been there the night before gave her looks of respect, some even stopping to ask if she would play again. A few regulars, who had only noticed her because she brought their food or refilled their drinks, now glanced at her as if seeing her for the first time. It was strange, almost uncomfortable, and she wasn't sure if she liked it. She had worked hard to be unnoticed, and now, suddenly she was not. The rich man had left that night, paying his bill with a generous tip and a quiet nod, but she had a feeling he would be back. She couldn't explain why, but the way he had watched her, the way he had leaned forward in his chair as her fingers moved over the keys, told her that he had seen something in her that he didn't see often, raw, real talent. And perhaps somewhere deep down, she wanted him to be back. She wanted someone else to see what she could do, to confirm what she had always known in her heart. But the world had its doubts, and she felt them in every glance. Co-workers whispered behind her back, some admiring, some skeptical. "Did you see her play last night?" One would say, "I can't believe she did that," another would reply. The whispers didn't bother her as much as she thought they would, but they reminded her that not everyone could see what she had seen in herself. Talent, courage, and opportunity often walked a fine line, and tonight had shown her just how thin that line could be as she worked. Taking orders and clearing tables, she found her thoughts drifting back to the piano. She wondered how long it would be before she could play again, whether she would ever get another chance to let herself be heard in the same way. The music had been more than sound. It had been a release, a reminder of who she had been before life had piled responsibilities and doubt on top of her dreams. It had reminded her of what it meant to truly live in a moment, to be fully present, and to let her talent speak louder than words ever could. That evening, As the restaurant slowed and the last few customers left, the waitress found herself lingering near the piano. Her fingers traced the keys lightly, almost automatically, as if they remembered a rhythm she had thought forgotten. She smiled to herself, a quiet, private smile. The music was still inside her, waiting patiently for the right moment to come alive again. She knew that moment had already begun. Even if she couldn't see where it would lead, the rich man returned sooner than she expected. He walked into the restaurant late one afternoon, alone this time, and her heart skipped a beat. He didn't come over immediately. He scanned the room first, as if looking for something, or perhaps testing whether the magic of the previous night would return. When he saw her, he nodded briefly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that carried more meaning than words could. She felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Was he here to make another bet? Or had he truly come to appreciate the music she could make? He approached her cautiously. "I wanted to see you again," he said, his voice quieter than the night before, almost respectful. "I wanted to hear you play once more." She blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. There was no mocking, no challenge this time, only genuine interest. She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a sense that someone finally understood, at least a little, what it meant to pour yourself into music and let it speak for you. "I can play," she said, her voice steadier than she expected, "but I haven't played in a long time. I'm not sure." Her words faltered, unsure of how much to reveal. "You don't have to be perfect," he said quickly. "I just want to hear it." For myself, his words were simple, but they carried weight. There was no bet, no challenge, no audience to impress, just someone who wanted to listen. That alone made her heart pound, and she felt the familiar thrill of stepping toward the piano, of letting herself be seen and heard once more. She sat down on the bench, her fingers brushing the keys lightly at first, testing them, feeling the worn wood beneath her touch. The first notes were hesitant, as if she were waking a sleeping memory, but soon the music began to flow more naturally, each chord finding its place, each melody rising and falling like it had always known the way. The rich man listened silently, his eyes fixed on her hands, but she didn't play for him. She played for herself, for the years of quiet practice and forgotten dreams. For the part of her that had always known she could do more than survive, she could create. She could inspire. She could change the way people saw her. The music filled the small space, and the restaurant seemed to fade around her. Even though it was quieter now, with only a few late customers scattered among the tables, the sound of the piano carried, wrapping around the room, filling it with warmth and emotion. She could feel it reaching into the corners, into the hearts of those who heard it, reminding her that she had something valuable to give. Something that could not be measured in tips or wages. Something that was hers alone, as she played. Memories came flooding back, the long evenings she had spent learning pieces that seemed impossible. The moments of frustration when her fingers refused to obey, the small victories when a difficult melody finally came together. She remembered her teacher's gentle encouragement, the pride in her parents' eyes when she performed in school recitals, and the quiet satisfaction of playing for herself late at night when no one else was listening. All of that had led her here, and all of it flowed through her fingers now, filling the air with music that was both familiar and new. The rich man remained quiet, but she could feel his admiration. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't challenging her. He was simply witnessing something extraordinary, something that had been hidden in plain sight for years. The music told a story he couldn't ignore, a story of perseverance, talent, and quiet determination. And even though she hadn't intended to, she realized she was telling her own story as well. A story she had kept locked inside herself for too long. Hours seemed to pass in minutes, and when she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the silence that followed was heavy with emotion. The rich man sat for a moment, absorbing what he had heard. Then, slowly, he clapped, softly at first, and then louder until the sound filled the small space. He smiled, not with arrogance this time, but with genuine respect. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with money or recognition. It was the warmth of being understood, of being seen for who she truly was. "Thank you," he said quietly, almost as if speaking aloud might shatter the moment. "That was incredible. You have a gift. Don't ever let it go," she nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and humility. She knew he was right. Music was a part of her that could never be taken away. A part of herself she had almost forgotten, but that now seemed more alive than ever. In the days that followed, the restaurant noticed a change. Customers asked for her by name, hoping to catch a glimpse of her playing again. Her coworkers treated her with newfound respect, some inspired, some still skeptical, but no longer dismissive. And for her, life felt different. The music had awakened something inside her, a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. She realized that her talent was not just a hobby, not just a memory, it was a part of her identity, something that could shape the world around her if she allowed it to, even in quiet moments. When she was alone, cleaning tables or restocking supplies, she found herself humming melodies under her breath, letting the rhythm of the music guide her movements. It became a private joy, a reminder that she was more than her job, more than her circumstances, more than anyone had expected. And deep down, she knew that the rich man's interest had only scratched the surface. What had begun as a bet was now the first step of something much larger, something she could feel but could not yet see clearly. That night, she returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. She sat by her window, looking out at the city lights, her fingers tracing invisible keys in the air. The music was still with her, alive and persistent, a companion she had rediscovered. She realized that talent, courage, and opportunity could appear at any moment, often when life seemed ordinary, and that embracing them required more than skill, it required bravery, faith, and a willingness to be seen. She smiled softly to herself, feeling a quiet determination settle over her. She would play again. She would not hide. She would let the music guide her, let it open doors she hadn't even imagined. And let it remind her that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The first night had been extraordinary, but now, as she prepared for what came next, she knew that this was only the beginning. The next morning, the waitress woke with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. The memory of last night's performance lingered in her mind like a song that refused to leave. Her small apartment felt quiet, almost too quiet, as if it were waiting with her for something to happen. She had not slept well, tossing and turning, her thoughts jumping from the applause to the faces of people staring at her hands, to the rich man who had watched her with that sharp, unreadable expression. That night had changed everything in ways she could not yet fully understand. She rose from her bed and went about her morning routine mechanically, making coffee, washing dishes, and listening to the city outside waking up. She had been so used to routine that most mornings were predictable and calm, but today felt different. Even the familiar clink of her mug against the sink sounded like a note in a melody she could not quite place. She kept her thoughts to herself, aware that even small people in her neighborhood would notice the change in her mood. If she spoke aloud about it, she immediately sensed that things were not the same. The staff greeted her differently, with quiet smiles and nods that seemed to say, "We saw you last night. We know what you did." Some coworkers whispered among themselves when she walked by, glancing at her as if measuring how much had changed in just a single evening. She smiled politely, but avoided the conversation. She knew that attention could be double-edged. While it could bring opportunities, it could also bring scrutiny. As she tied her apron, she noticed that the old piano in the corner looked almost different under the morning light. Perhaps it was her imagination, or perhaps the memories of the night before had made it seem more important. She brushed a finger lightly over the keys, and a soft note sounded, echoing in the empty restaurant. The sound was familiar, comforting, and for a moment, she closed her eyes and let herself remember the hours she had spent practicing as a child. The piano had been her secret, her solace, and now it was becoming a bridge between her past and an uncertain future. The rich man returned that afternoon. He walked into the restaurant alone, his steps quiet, but purposeful. When their eyes met, she felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but this time it was different. It was not the nerves of being judged or challenged. It was the nerves of anticipation, the the kind that comes before an unknown but meaningful experience. He nodded at her, a small gesture that carried weight, and she returned it, unsure what he expected. "I wanted to hear you again," he said, his voice quieter than before, almost respectful. "Not as a bet, not as a joke. I just want to hear you play." She blinked, surprised. There was no challenge, no mocking, no audience beyond him, and a few late customers scattered in the room. It was simply an invitation, and she felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and walked toward the piano, feeling the weight of the moment, but also a sense of freedom. Sitting down, she let her fingers hover over the keys, testing them lightly. The wood felt smooth but worn, and the keys had their familiar unevenness that she remembered from years ago. She inhaled slowly, recalling the countless hours of practice, frustration, the triumph, and the quiet joy that playing brought her. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. There was no restaurant, no rich man, no curious eyes. There was only her and the music, as it had always been. Waiting for her to let it out, the first note sounded softly, almost hesitant, then another, more confident. And soon, her fingers moved over the keys with the ease and grace of someone who had been born to play. The melodies flowed naturally, carrying memories, emotions, and stories she had long kept hidden. She realized that this was not just playing. It was sharing herself piece by piece, note by note, in a way words could never achieve. The rich man sat silently, his eyes fixed on her hands. For the first time, he was not judging, not betting, not entertaining himself. He was witnessing something real, something raw and powerful, something that demanded attention without asking for it. He leaned slightly forward, captivated, almost as if he could feel the music moving through the air and into his own chest. Other people in the restaurant paused, sensing the change in atmosphere. Even the few late customers who had been talking quietly stopped, their heads turning toward the piano as if drawn by a force beyond explanation. The music had a way of filling the room, of silencing distractions, of making ordinary people notice extraordinary things. The waitress did not notice them. She could not. She was lost in the sound, letting it guide her, letting it reveal the part of herself she had kept buried beneath routines, jobs, and responsibilities. The piano told stories she had never spoken aloud. It told of quiet evenings at home, practicing late at night while the world slept. It told of childhood dreams that seemed impossible in a life defined by survival. It told of struggles, heartaches, and triumphs, all woven together in melodies that rose and fell like waves on a shore. And as she played, she felt something shifting inside her. A quiet but powerful realization that she had talent and strength, that no one could take away. She remembered the fear she had felt the night before. Sitting at the piano with the room watching, unsure if she would succeed or fail. That fear had not disappeared, but it had transformed. Now it was mixed with courage, with determination, with a sense that she could face challenges not with hesitation, but with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are. The rich man finally spoke after a long pause. You have something special," he said quietly, almost in awe. "I didn't expect it, and I wasn't ready to see it. But this is real." She nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude she could not put into words. She did not need him to validate her. She had already done that for herself, sitting at the piano and letting the music pour out. But hearing someone else recognize it, even briefly, made her feel that the world might finally start to see her differently. The music continued, and she allowed herself to take risks, playing pieces she had only dreamed of performing, notes and melodies that required both skill and emotion. She played with her whole being, letting the piano be a bridge between who she had been and who she could become. Each chord carried a story, each melody a fragment of her life. She felt a profound connection to the music she had once thought forgotten. Time passed without her noticing. Hours seemed to shrink into minutes, and when she finally lifted her hands, the silence that followed was heavy with emotion. The rich man sat quietly, absorbing everything, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. It was not the awkward silence of uncertainty. It was the kind of silence that holds the weight of something extraordinary, something rare, something worth remembering. Then slowly he clapped. Soft at first, then louder, until the sound filled the small space. It was genuine, unforced, full of respect and amazement. She smiled softly, feeling warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with money or recognition. It was the warmth of being seen, of being acknowledged, of knowing that what she had shared mattered. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Customers asked for her by name, hoping to catch a glimpse of her playing. Coworkers treated her with newfound respect, some inspired, some still skeptical, but no longer dismissive. And for her, life felt different. She realized that talent, courage, and opportunity could appear in ordinary moments, often when life seemed most mundane, and that embracing them required more than skill. It required bravery, faith, and a willingness to be seen, even in quiet moments. Cleaning tables or restocking supplies, she found herself humming melodies under her breath, letting the rhythm guide her movements. It became a private joy, a reminder that she was more than her job, more than her circumstances, more than anyone had expected. And deep down, she knew the rich man's interest had only scratched the surface. What had begun as a bet was now the first step of something much larger, something she could feel but could not yet see clearly. That evening, returning home, she sat by her window, looking out at the city lights, her fingers tracing invisible keys in the air. The music was still with her, alive and persistent, a companion she had rediscovered. She realized that life could shift in a single night, that ordinary people could be seen in extraordinary ways, and that her path forward was hers to shape. She smiled softly, feeling a quiet determination settle over her. She would play again. She would not hide. She would let the music guide her, open doors she had not imagined, and remind her that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. And in that quiet apartment, as the city hummed outside, the waitress made a silent promise to herself. The first night had been a beginning, but now, as she felt the music pulse through her veins, she knew that the story was only just starting. The next week at the restaurant felt like a new world. The waitress moved through her duties with a strange mix of focus and excitement. She carried trays, refilled drinks, and answered questions with the same calm efficiency as always, but something had changed inside her. Each time she walked past the piano in the corner, she felt it calling to her. It was as if the wood itself remembered the music she had played, and it whispered promises of melodies yet to be discovered. She had learned to keep her confidence quiet. The rich man's return had been brief, and while he had listened and clapped, she knew that life could return to normal quickly, that the moment she had shared could be forgotten as easily as it had appeared. Still, she could not ignore the sense that something was shifting. People had noticed and they treated her differently. Even regular customers who had once barely looked at her now stopped to watch her as she moved through the restaurant, some smiling, some whispering to one another. That afternoon, the restaurant was quieter than usual. A few tables had been reserved for a private lunch. The waitress found herself glancing at the piano more than she normally would. She had been thinking about the rich man's words. "You have something special. Don't ever let it go." Those words echoed in her mind, not as a command, but as a gentle reminder that she was capable of more than she had allowed herself to believe. One of the regulars, a quiet woman who often came in for lunch alone, watched her with curiosity. "I saw you play the other night," she said softly as the waitress refilled her water. "I didn't know you could do that. It was incredible." The waitress nodded politely, feeling warmth in her chest. Compliments had never come easily to her, and she had spent years avoiding attention. But now, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel proud, not in a showy way, but quietly, deeply, like a hidden flame finally lit. After her shift, she lingered by the piano. The restaurant had emptied, the afternoon sunlight spilling across the wooden floor. She sat on the bench, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. She remembered the first night she had played, the rich man's smirk, the whispers of doubt, and then the silence as the music took over. The memory of that moment was vivid, almost tangible. She felt the same thrill building inside her as she began to play again. This time, She was not performing for anyone. There was no audience, no bet, no expectation. She played for herself, for the years she had spent learning, for the countless quiet nights she had dedicated to music, for the dreams she had tucked away in a drawer and nearly forgotten. The melodies rose naturally, flowing like a river over rocks, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes strong and determined. Each note seemed to release a piece of herself she had been holding back. Each chord carried a story she had never shared aloud. The music transformed the empty restaurant. The sunlight on the tables seemed to dance with the notes, and the soft echo of the piano filled the space with warmth. She realized that the piano had always been more than an instrument. It was a bridge between who she had been and who she could become. It was a voice she could trust, a companion that never judged, and a mirror reflecting her true self. Hours passed without her noticing. She played through memories, dreams, regrets, and hopes, each note carrying emotion that words could never capture. She remembered her childhood teacher, a kind and patient woman who had encouraged her when others doubted her abilities. She remembered the recitals she had performed in school, the nervousness, the small triumphs, the pride in her parents' eyes. All of those experiences had shaped her, and now they flowed freely through her fingertips, giving the music depth and power. Suddenly, the door opened quietly. She had not heard anyone enter, and she looked up to see the rich man standing there, watching her with a soft smile. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said gently, "but I had to hear it again." She paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. "I wasn't expecting anyone," she said, a little breathless. "You don't need to play for me," he said. "I just wanted to see you lost in it again. There's something about the way you play. It's not just talent, it's honesty. You put yourself into it. That's rare." She smiled softly, feeling warmth she could not explain. It was one thing to perform for an audience. It was another to be understood. He had not come to judge, to bet, or to challenge. He had come to witness, and that made all the difference. She started to play again, slower this time, more deliberately. She chose pieces she had always loved, but never had the courage to perform. Each note carried intention, each pause held weight. The rich man remained silent, but she could see the admiration in his eyes. He was not simply appreciating her skill. He was absorbing her story, the emotion behind each melody as she played. Her mind wandered to all the small moments that had brought her here. The long evenings at home, practicing alone, the frustration when her fingers refused to cooperate, the exhilaration when a difficult passage finally came together. She thought of the people who had doubted her, the friends who had encouraged her quietly, and the strangers who had never noticed her until that one night. She realized that all of it's a doubt, the encouragement, the solitude, the joy had built her into someone who could create something real, something that moved others. The music became stronger, more confident. She played with her whole being, letting go of fear and doubt, letting herself be carried by the rhythm and melody. Her fingers moved with skill, grace, and emotion, each chord telling a story that words could never fully capture. The rich man watched intently, leaning slightly forward, as if trying to absorb not just the sound, but the essence of who she was. For the first time, she felt a strange sense of liberation. She had hidden her talent for so long, kept it private, almost secret, as if it were too precious to share. Now she understood that sharing it was not only a gift to others, but a gift to herself. Music had always been a part of her, and allowing it to speak freely was a way of reclaiming something she had almost lost. She finished the piece with a soft, lingering note, letting it echo in the empty restaurant. For a moment, there was silence. The rich man's eyes glistened slightly, though he tried to hide it. "You have no idea how powerful that was," he said quietly. "You make people feel things they didn't expect. That's rare." She nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with praise. It was the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you have shared something meaningful, something that matters, even if only for a moment. The music was no longer just a memory of the past. It was alive, moving forward with her, guiding her toward possibilities she had never imagined. The days after that performance were filled with small changes. Customers lingered a little longer, hoping to catch her playing. Co-workers treated her with more respect, no longer dismissive of the quiet waitress who had always seemed ordinary. The piano, once ignored in the corner, had become a focal point, a place where people expected magic to happen. And for her, life felt fuller, more vibrant, as if the world itself had shifted just enough to allow her talent to shine. One evening, a young girl approached her while she was cleaning tables. "I heard you play the other night," the girl said, her eyes wide. "You were amazing." "I want to learn piano too, but I don't know where to start." The waitress smiled softly, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze. "It's not easy at first," she said gently. "It takes time and patience, but it's worth it. If you love it, you keep going, no matter what anyone says." The girl nodded, and the waitress realized that her music was not only transforming her own life, but inspiring others. The gift she had once kept to herself was now reaching beyond her own experience, touching people she had never met, guiding them toward possibilities they had not imagined. That night, after the restaurant closed, she lingered by the piano again. The rich man had not returned, and the room was quiet. She let her fingers brush the keys, testing melodies she had never played aloud. The music was hers alone, private and powerful, a reminder that she had